Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services proposed Everglades to Gulf Conservation Area virtual public meeting. We're going to give folks a few minutes here to join the webinar, and then we'll begin the PowerPoint presentation shortly. So please stay tuned. I do want to note that closed captioning is available by selecting the closed caption icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you're using the Zoom web portal or Zoom app on your computer. So you'll find that in your Zoom toolbar, and then you'll select Show Subtitles. Thank you everyone for your patience as we give folks a few minutes to join. Again, welcome everyone to today's meeting. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to join the meeting, so please stay tuned and we'll start the presentation shortly. Again, I do want to note that closed captioning is available by selecting the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you're using the Zoom web portal or Zoom app on your computer, and then you'll select Show Subtitles. Thank you again, everyone, for your patience while we give folks a few minutes to join. Hello, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with our meeting today. Next slide, please. On behalf of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We appreciate your time and participation. My name is Megan Stone with Environmental Management and Planning Solutions, Inc., a contractor for the service, and I'm going to be one of your meeting facilitators today. Additionally, I have my colleagues Val Stanson and Liza Schill on with me who will be helping with Zoom. And I have several members of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with me on the meeting today who will be listening to your comments and will introduce themselves in a moment. On the screen, we have our anticipated agenda for today. I'll first go over some brief ground rules. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will provide introductions and a PowerPoint presentation, which will last approximately 30 minutes. The remainder of the meeting will be dedicated to accepting comments. The comments are collected for the record, and the service will not be responding to these comments tonight. However, all comments received during the public hearing and the open public comment period will be fully considered by the service. Next slide, please. Before we get started with the presentation, I'll go over some ground rules. First, this meeting is being recorded as part of the project record, and the recording will be posted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. Second, your microphones and videos will be turned off for the duration of the meeting tonight. You'll only be unmuted if and when I unmute you during the verbal public comment portion of the meeting if you are commenting. After the presentation, we will then move on to the virtual public hearing portion of the meeting, during which we will accept verbal public comments from participants who have joined today's meeting. If you registered before the start time of today's meeting and indicated that you wanted to offer verbal public comment, you are on our list of pre-registered commenters and will be called on during the public comment portion. If you registered after the meeting started, we'll do our best to reserve some time for you to have an opportunity to offer your verbal public comment. We'll do our best to reserve if we have time remaining after we've gone through our list of pre-registered commenters, we'll open up the verbal public comment portion of the meeting up to anyone who would like to offer a comment, regardless of whether you selected yes or no to commenting when you registered for today's meeting. We do want to note that earlier in spring of this year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducted scoping meetings, both virtually and in person, that were more informal. However, we are now at a more formal stage in the federal process where we are only receiving comments today to ensure a fair and equitable process for all to be heard. So we'll really be focusing on listening to those comments. While we'll not be responding to questions or comments today, all questions and comments will be recorded, considered, and answered through the planning process in the final document as part of an appendix. This appendix would include those comments submitted through the public meetings or during the public review and comment period from September 26th through November 1st, 2023. We'll also be posting links in the chat to the draft LPP package, a project fact sheet, and frequently asked questions where some of your questions may already be addressed. And if you do not get the opportunity to offer your verbal public comment tonight, written public comments can be submitted electronically via email or via hard copy. Both the website and mailing addresses will be given during today's presentation. And as I mentioned, the comment period will be open through November 1st. We'll provide further information on how to submit your written public comments in the Zoom chat, and we'll also provide information on the in-person meetings that we'll be having this week as well in Southwest Florida. So with that, I'll now turn it over to Kathy Burchett, who will lead us through introductions and her presentation.
Thank you, Megan. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out today of your very busy schedules to be part of this very important effort. I'd also would like to thank Senator Rick Scott's office, Ms. Erin Devers, for participating in this virtual presentation as well. So thank you. Right now, I would like to introduce our panel members that are here listening to your comments. We have Laura Hausch. Ms. Laura Hausch is our regional branch lead for planning for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We also have Pam Wingrove, who is our regional lead for planning and visitor services for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Region 4. We have Justin Dewey. He is the Florida Realty Specialist with the Realty Division out of our headquarters. Kevin Godsey, who is our project leader of Southwest Florida National Wildlife Refuge Complex, that includes Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge Complex and Florida Panther National Wildlife Complex. We also have Ted Darnell with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Ecological Services program. He is Florida's private lands biologist lead. And we have Ms. Julie Morris, the director of the Florida Conservation Group and the National Wildlife Refuge Association lead for Florida and Gulf National Wildlife Refuge. She is contracted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to help us with this endeavor. So again, my name is Kathy Burchett. I am the refuge supervisor for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I supervise the refuges that are contained in Florida, the Caribbean, and the Gulf Coastal Complex in Mississippi and Alabama. I'm also in charge of Everglades restoration activities for the National Wildlife Refuge program that includes a lot of water quality issues. I've been with the service for 31 years, 18 of which I've been a refuge manager, managing refuges, conservation areas, waterfowl production areas throughout the Midwest, Montana, and for the last 4 years, I've been here in Florida, stationed out of Vero Beach, working for our regional office. Next slide, please. So why are we here today? Well, today I would like to provide an overview of the refuge system, explain how we add units to the National Wildlife Refuge System, talk a bit about our draft land protection plan or LPP and the environmental assessment, and also give you a glimpse of the conceptual management plan. We'll outline the next steps in the planning process, but most importantly, we're here today to obtain feedback from you. Next slide. So again, I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is part of the U.S. Department of Interior. And under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the National Wildlife Refuge System. Next slide. So there's currently 570 National Wildlife Refuges protecting over 150 million acres of land. The mission of the National Wildlife Refuge System is to administer a network of lands and waters for the conservation, management, and where appropriate, restoration of the fish and wildlife and plant resources and their habitats within the United States for the benefit of present and future generations of Americans. A lot of the decisions made on National Wildlife Refuges are based on the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act of 1997. National Wildlife Refuge System includes national wildlife refuges, waterfowl production areas, conservation areas, and marine national monuments. There's a refuge in every state, 5 U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and several in the Pacific Isles. Next slide. So let's talk a bit about a purpose for a refuge. The National Wildlife Refuge System can react to species habitat needs from impacts such as climate change or other things. And we can establish new refuges or expand existing refuges to address those needs. There's 2 ways the National Wildlife Refuge System unit may be established: legislatively by Congress or administratively by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director. There's 61 National Wildlife Refuges established for the primary purpose of conserving threatened and endangered species. Next slide. So let's talk about the first National Wildlife Refuge. It was here in Florida on the East Coast. Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge was the very first refuge. It was established by Teddy Roosevelt on March 14, 1903. So what is the difference between a National Wildlife Refuge and a conservation area? Well, specifically, National Wildlife Refuges tend to be fee title ownership with active land management. Wildlife-dependent public uses often occur there, and they're often staffed with facilities and staff. Conservation areas are a designated area where we work collaboratively with our conservation partners to protect land and fish and wildlife resources, lands and waters. But they're mostly easements, and the landowner maintains the ownership. Next slide. So how do you establish a unit of the refuge system? Well, you start off with a conceptual idea, like, is this an area where the Fish and Wildlife Service can have the seat at the table to help with conservation objectives? We then look deeper and called a phase 1. We develop what we call a landscape conservation plan, and we bring that forward to the director. And on phase 2, if the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service decides that this idea or concept is worth moving forward, we go forward with a draft land protection plan and environmental assessment. And then, depending on the comments that we received and we address these comments, we then go back to the director and ask for the approval to move forward with the establishment. And a refuge or a unit of the refuge system is officially established once we receive a parcel, either through donation or acquisition. Next slide. So how did we get to where we are today? Well, many of you might recall recently in scoping, we talked about a landscape conservation design, which included a study area. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, through the contracted support of the University of Florida, Dr. Tom Hocker and Ms. Julie Morris, our contractor, we went through and we did a very thorough evaluation on threats, potential areas for acquisition, like, is there even a role for the service to play? And do we have the resources there to move forward? So we looked at this in a broad 7 million acre area, and we looked at all the possibilities that might occur in that area, what other people are doing, what are other partners doing in this landscape. So the proposed conservation area was defined from the study area. And also, as part of that process, we move forward with establishing an official name of the conservation area, which we'll get to shortly. So let's talk about scoping. Next slide, please. So the service conducted 4 in-person and 2 virtual presentations occurring in March and April for 35 days. We had several people provide us feedback, and with that feedback, We used it to set goals, objectives, boundaries of the conservation area, protection strategies. How are we going to protect lands? Well, of course, the service only works with willing sellers, so that became a significant part. So with our willing sellers, what will we purchase? B, conservation easement. How are we going to move forward? So that's what we received feedback through scoping. Next slide. What did we hear? We received over 2,600 comments, widely supportive. People wanted to talk about habitats, about prioritizing wildlife. They wanted us to talk about public use opportunities, partnership opportunities, what else is happening in the landscape. And also we even had some landowners submit their willingness and interest in being part of any program the service may develop. So I want to take a few minutes and go through some slides of some broad categories that we received feedback on. Next slide. So these are some of the topics that were identified during scoping. People wanted to talk about things like water quality and the quantity, Everglades restoration, how this project could assist with that process, grazing on fee title lands, while using the tools that we use in order to keep land healthy. People talked about specific boundary recommendations for a conservation area. So remember that study area? We wanted to talk about what portion of that study area should we consider for a proposed conservation area. Next slide. People also gave us feedback on thinking about taking mine lands and restoring them, because some of those lands might be extremely critical for preserving wildlife linkages. People also gave us feedback on providing tribal access on National Wildlife Refuge fee title lands. What kind of recreational opportunities people would like to see. How this project might affect the local economy. Other examples of federal management. And again, the name. And the reason why the name's important is the name should be a reflection of the goals and objectives of this project. Next slide, please. Our planning team. So after we received all that feedback, it was shared with our planning team. There are 25 active participants. We met weekly. We had 2 tribal nations engaged, the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida and the Seminole Tribe of Florida. We had 2 state agencies, Florida DEP and FWC. We had represented the University of Florida through contract and also National Wildlife Refuge Association of Florida Conservation Group. Multiple U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service programs also were part of the planning team, both regional office representation and also field representation. And this significantly enriched the process and expanded our considerations. Next slide, please. All right, so what did we hope to achieve in our land protection plan and the environmental assessment? Well, we conducted a draft. We looked at vision, goals, and objectives. We talked about the boundary, access to the fee title lands. We did an impact analysis, and we talked about evaluating alternatives. Next slide. So the goals, what were the goals of the project? To protect, restore, and manage habitats for fish and wildlife, provide science-driven landscape level conservation, conserve important lands and waters for the benefit of people, and promote conservation partnerships working with adaptive and flexible tools. Next slide. So our objectives: sustain and recover the Florida panther plus over 70 other threatened and endangered species. In fact, after our analysis of the new proposed conservation area, there's over 110 threatened and endangered species, plants, animals, insects of state and federal level. There's 17 at-risk species identified federally and 22 birds of conservation concern. Protection and restoration of water resources, for example, the Peace River, the Myakka River watersheds were also part of the protect and restore watersheds and coastal estuaries. And not only for the wildlife, but also for people, recreation, and the local economy. And this is sort of where our name came about. As you know, the Peace and the Myakka River watersheds are super important for preservation of the Gulf estuaries. And so is the Caloosahatchee Rivershed and the Fish-Eating Creek watersheds, which also are very significant in Everglades restoration success. Next objective. So, and you know that Florida has very unique natural communities and species adapted to unique habitat conditions. And we wanted to preserve that diversity and complexity, improve the resiliency, and also complement other very successful conservation initiatives, such as the Florida Wildlife Corridor Initiative, Florida Forever program through DEP, Rural and Family Lands through FDACS, and the Wetland Reserve Easement Program with the National NRCS. Next slide. In order to protect these rural landscapes, this mosaic of natural communities and ranch lands, the only way we're able to achieve this is the fact that there's been this generationally wise stewardship of our landowners currently. The ranching communities have done an outstanding job protecting these habitats so that we can move forward today and be able to provide an opportunity to conserve and protect these areas as well, so that we can combat fragmentation. We can provide wildlife corridors and linkages that are essential for species adaptation to things such as climate change and sea level rise. Next slide. But in addition to the resources, it's also about partnerships and people. Working with our existing highly successful partnerships, creating new partnerships, conserving cultural sites and their landscapes, and providing the opportunity for cultural, traditional, and medicinal use opportunities for tribal nations. And we also want to provide wildlife-dependent recreational opportunities on fee title lands. Next slide. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the boundary of the proposed conservation area. This was really important to the success of our program. We had to figure out where are we going to work and as a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So again, that name, the preservation and restoration focus of the Gulf through the protection of the Myakka and Peace River watersheds, and Everglade restoration objectives by providing protection north and south through the system. So this helps us with the Caloosahatchee River and the Fishing Creek watersheds, and also this project area will help us improve water quality entering into Lake Okeechobee. So let's start explaining how this boundary came about through the planning team. So first, the northern section of the boundary. You can see up here, that was an exact result of feedback we received during scoping. We had folks mention that that area right there across I-4 was really, really critical for wildlife linkages. And from that feedback, we decided to include that area. If you work your way south along that eastern boundary, many of you might recognize that. That is the boundary of Everglades Headwaters National Wildlife and Conservation Area. Extremely successful partnership, very similar to this project as well, where we conserve lands through fee title and willing seller conservation easements. So you'll see that there's an area south of that Everglades headwater, just north of Lake Okeechobee. That whole area there was added out of feedback from scoping, where folks said at first they weren't sure about whether or not they wanted to be part of the Everglades Headwaters Conservation Area. But after seeing 10 years of success, they realized that they want to be part of the new program, so they asked us to consider. And considering the rich habitat ecological priorities that are contained in that area, we quickly concurred that that was a great area to include. Additionally, you'll see some areas like some polygons that are carved out. Those are tribal nation lands. Although our tribal partners were part of the planning team, and they're very, very supportive and interested in preserving fish and wildlife resources and water quality, they requested that their tribal lands be not be included in the effort, which we happily concurred with their request. Now, let's look a little bit. You may find this pretty interesting, and that is the western boundary. It seems very weird, the shape of it. Well, that is actually very intentional and very specific. It's based off of a couple things. One is development. It is so rapid. You'll see that some areas there's been a rapid exodus from the coastal areas inland, and development has providing that opportunity to provide more and more housing and other things. And some of these areas are no longer available for protection. So that's why they were not included compared to the study area. But some areas, you see these little dog ears sticking out and dog legs. Those are areas where maybe there's already protection occurring. And those are areas that have not been protected by our partners yet. And yet the service could potentially help with the conservation of certain areas. You see that especially north and south of the Charlotte Harbor area. And again, you know, what's very important is, what does the proposed conservation area provide? It provides the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service the opportunity to have a seat at the table to work with our partners. Next slide, please. And that's important because you see here, the darker the green, the higher the ecological priority. Yet all three, the lime green, medium green, and dark green, are all very, very critical, important lands to protect. And this analysis was completed during our landscape conservation design. It combined 12 different habitat models, including the CLIP database and the Florida Ecological Greenways Network database provided by Dr. Hucker. And what's really important here is you can see how important these habitats really are. This is an amazing opportunity in Southwest Florida for conservation. Next slide, please. And I mentioned our partners. Well, you can see this slide's a little out to date, and that's a good thing. Those gray areas are areas that are already protected in that really important habitat. And you know why it's out to date? Because the state has done incredible work conserving lands. And we too, if this proposal was adapted and approved by the director, we could have help advance conservation with our partners. We too could have a seat at the table and help protect these linkages and corridors. Anywhere that's gray on this map is already protected, but you see some really dark blue and aqua, and then this lime green. Those are all habitats that still need protection. And we could be part of that initiative through this process, and if this proposal was approved. So how much land within that 4 million acre conservation area is available for protection? Well, it's about 3.3 million acres. And that's the total availability of potentially protected habitat. And remember, the service only works with willing landowners. And out of that entire conservation area boundary that's being proposed, we could purchase in fee title up to 10%, or around 400,000 acres. Next slide, please. So why is this important? Well, many of you are aware of the fast pace and large scale of habitat loss due to new development and rapidly expanding coastal development in areas. And this is moving further and further inland. Fresh and saltwater ecosystems, watersheds in the estuaries, are increasingly impacted by stormwater and nutrient pollution that is fueling our blue-green algae blooms in Lake Okeechobee and the Caloosahatchee River. And we're seeing increasingly frequent and severe and longer durations of red tide events. The quantity and timing of water delivery from Lake Okeechobee is crucial in Everglades restoration, as you're aware. The lands and waters are also vulnerable to sea level rise associated with climate change. And that's because we're talking about a topographic gradient that is relatively low and very flat. We have high level of coastal development that I mentioned. And you can also see or be aware that the Peace River and the Myakka River watersheds are being increasingly impacted by development, intensive agriculture, and also phosphate mining. Next map, please. So this here is our threats analysis within the conservation area. It's based out of the Florida Future Land Use, the Florida 2070 Trend Development Scenario. And as you know, in 2022, more than 1,000 people a day moved into Florida. That is a Miami a year. And with this new development comes more roads and more interstates and more exits and et cetera. And that all puts more and more pressure on the valuable resources. And this map helps us understand urgency. Where is the highest developmental pressure? Where do we need to work first? And how are we going to address these biological needs and threats? And again, we do that through the land protection tools of the National Wildlife Refuge Service, which includes purchasing less than fee or fee title development rights. Next slide, please. So how would we manage our fee title lands? Well, and less than fee. Well, for less than fee title ownership, such as conservation easement, ownership remains with the landowner. The landowner is responsible to maintain and manage the habitat in perpetuity and the condition when the development rights were purchased. The landowner determines the access and use of their land. The conservation easement runs with the land. So if the land is sold, the new landowner is responsible for adhering to the conditions of the conservation easement. Fee title land becomes a unit of the National Wildlife Refuge System, and it's managed based on the conceptual management plan, which for this project would include administering it as part of the Everglades Headwaters National Wildlife and Refuge Complex. We would get managed support from our neighboring refuges, like Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge or Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge, or even Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. Active management would occur on these fee title lands, including prescribed fire, grazing, selective timber harvest, and also treatment of exotic species, which we all know is an extreme threat in Florida. So where would we support it through law enforcement? Well, we would see law enforcement support through our fish and wildlife officers by both our North and South Florida districts. Next slide. So what could the people expect to do on these fee title lands? Well, we would provide the opportunity for big six wildlife dependent opportunities like hunting, fishing, wildlife observation, photography, interpretation, and environmental education. And also, if we had hunting and fishing, it would be in collaboration with the FWC as part of the wildlife management area system through a cooperative agreement. We've modeled that in the Everglades Headwaters National Wildlife Refuge System, and it's been highly successful and is both enjoyed by the public in the state and us, and also the users. It's a great program. We can also include other wildlife dependent compatible uses. In our scoping, people mentioned, what about bicycling and camping and horseback riding? And these are all potentially uses that could occur if they're wildlife dependent and compatible. And also we would provide limited facilities, and these lands would generally be accessible during daylight hours. Next slide. So how can we expect to see access for the tribal nations? Well, we could provide it on fee title lands based on cultural, medicinal, religious, traditional, or ceremonial purposes and needs. We would provide reasonable access, and we'd coordinate with through the refuge manager, and these uses would have to be compatible with the purpose of the conservation area. And we could manage this through some form of memorandum of agreement. Next slide. So how are we going to pay for this? It's always a question, and a good question. Well, we would expect to see, based on other models of refuges with similar goals and objectives and vision, that would cost about $500,000 a year. We would expect that built out, it would have about 3 full-time employees. And we would expect to see large construction costs running about $20 million over a 30-year period. Well, what would be a large construction cost? Well, that's something like an office, shop facility, visitor center, like maybe if we needed a large water conservation, water control structure, or maybe roads and parking lots. So that's kind of, generally where things would lie. Well, how would we pay for the land acquisition? Well, most likely through the Land Water Conservation Fund. That is our primary source for land acquisition in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's also some other sources too, however, like the North American Wetlands Conservation Fund, potentially conservation and mitigation banks, habitat conservation plans, and other partnerships that we could pursue to help fund land. Next slide. So where are we at in this timetable? Well, this may be in very unique circumstance where we are really, really on time for the objectives we set back in April of 2022. And that's a wonderful feeling. So here we are, September, October. We as you know, late September, we released the draft land protection plan and environmental assessment out to the public for review and comment. And that's why we're here today. And we will take your comments, and we appreciate your comments, and we will use them to develop a final document in November, December of 2023. We will hope to produce that and deliver that to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director, Martha Williams, for her approval. If she does approve the proposal, we would then establish the refuge sometime after January 2024. Next slide. So how are we going to get the feedback? Well, we had a virtual meeting on Friday. We have one today, and then we'll have 2 more in-person meetings on October 25th in Wauchula and October 26th at Immokalee High School. Next slide. And we ask you, if you know folks who are interested, please encourage them to attend one of those events. But also, we are taking comments, and you can go to our website here and provide comments in written form too. And we will also be loading up one of our presentations, so it'll be there as well. So thank you for your for listening, and I will turn